the notion of asking the 4 questions, you're supposed to do it in the language that people understand, because they're important to ask, and some people do them in Yiddish and in Ladino and in Spanish or whatever. So I say that only because my grandmother came from a little town in Ukraine called Levitt, and she would sit at our Passover Seder, and we would go around the table to read the Haggadah, and my grandmother never had her glasses. So she would always say, I don't have my glasses, go to the next person. And you know, when I was 5, I just didn't think anything of it. But every year, my grandmother didn't have her glasses. I finally said to my mother, how come Grandma never remembers her glasses? And my mother said, well, you know, it's not that. She just doesn't really speak English. She doesn't read English so well, and she's a little embarrassed to read in front of all of us. So I must have been 10 or 11 when my mother told me this story, and I developed, I think, unconsciously the sense that my grandmother was illiterate. She was a wonderful person, and I loved her. But I carried with me a sense that, you know, my grandmother couldn't read English. She could read English, but she wasn't comfortable reading English. When I was in college, I brought home a friend of mine who wasn't Jewish, who wanted to see what a Passover Seder looked like. And she was Russian. I mean, she wasn't Russian. She was a Russian major at Barnard. And she met my grandmother, and she started speaking Russian to my grandmother. And my grandmother was speaking fluent Russian to her. I don't think my grandmother had spoken Russian since the day she left Russia. And then she asked my roommate what she was studying, and she said she was studying Pushkin. And the next thing I knew, my grandmother was reciting Pushkin by heart. And so this grandmother, who I thought was illiterate, you know, turns out to have been very literate. And it reminded me so much about, always reminds me about the power of language and the importance of understanding the value of each person, even if you don't fully understand them.